The house was eerily quiet. No sound of the piano, no hum of the TV, no laughter. Graceland, usually bustling with life, felt like a ghost town. I had a bad feeling as I walked through the hallway, my footsteps echoing off the polished floors. I reached Elvis's door and hesitated for a moment. Then I pushed it open. Elvis was lying on his bed, his eyes closed. His face was pale, and there was a stillness about him that I had never seen before. I rushed to his side, my heart pounding. "Elvis, Elvis, wake up." No response. I checked his pulse, but it was weak, barely there. Panic set in. I grabbed the phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking. "Please, please, please," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. The ambulance arrived, and the paramedics worked frantically, trying to revive him, but it was too late. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was gone. The world seemed to stop spinning that day. For those of us who knew him, it was like losing a part of ourselves. But before the shock and grief settled in, I couldn't help but think about the journey that led us to this moment. Elvis was more than just a famous singer. He was a man with a deep faith, a heart for God, and a passion for sharing that faith with the world. Elvis always believed that God had given him an almost unlimited amount of gold, not in the form of money, but in the form of talent. He felt a responsibility to use his gifts to serve people and honor God, and he did just that. His music wasn't just entertainment. It was a message, a lifeline for those who needed it. Earlier in the book, I talked about Elvis's desire to get back to live performances. Studio work and movies were great, but nothing compared to the energy and connection of a live audience. He loved the way the crowd would respond to his music, the way their energy would fuel his own. It was more than just a performance. It was a way to share something important, something that mattered. Elvis was never one to hide his faith. He would often sing gospel songs during his concerts, especially in the 1970s. When you saw Elvis in concert, you knew you'd get a dose of gospel. It was his way of letting people know where he stood. He wanted to share the message of God's love, to encourage people to pick up the Bible and believe. But why did he feel so strongly about it? Because Elvis believed that God had a plan for everyone. In John chapter 16, verse 33, Jesus says, "In this world you will have trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world." Elvis took comfort in these words, especially during the hard times. He believed that God could help us through anything, even the toughest challenges. Elvis once told me, "You're going to go through hard times. Everybody does. And after you've gone through it, that means God has given you a new strength and another hurdle you don't have to face anymore. Be thankful for even the hard times you went through in life, because you learned something. God is going to get you through it." He lived by this belief, and it showed in everything he did. Whether he was playing the piano in the living room, singing gospel songs, or performing on stage, his faith was always at the center. He didn't just talk about God, he lived it. But fame came with its own set of challenges. Betrayal by those closest to him, the pressure to maintain a certain image, and the constant scrutiny of the public eye were just a few of the burdens he carried. One of the most heartbreaking moments was when former friends published a book exposing his personal life. It was a betrayal that hurt him deeply, but he forgave them just as he forgave others. Elvis knew he wasn't perfect. He made mistakes just like we all do. But he always tried to be good, to live a life that honored God. He faced the same daily battles of right and wrong that we all face, and he did his best to make the right choices. One day, while we were watching a program about the Vietnam War, Elvis turned to me and said, "Did you know there's a battle going on inside everyone?" I thought he meant the battle between good and evil, but he had something deeper in mind. Most people don't open their hearts to see people, or hear what they say, or really talk to them. He said, "What are you thinking with, Billy? Your brain or your heart?" It was a question that stayed with me, a reminder to live with compassion and understanding. Elvis saw the world through his heart, and that's what made him who he was. The night the music stopped, the world lost a legend. But the legacy of Elvis Presley lives on, not just in his music, but in the message he shared. His faith, his love, and his commitment to God continue to inspire us even today. Elvis was sitting on the edge of the boat, taking a break from filming. He had taken off his scuba tank and mask, but left his weight belt on. The sun was shining, and everyone was chatting about the next scene. Suddenly, a big wave hit the side of the boat. Before anyone could react, The wave knocked Elvis off the boat and into the water. Elvis tried to swim, but the weight belt pulled him down. He couldn't get a good breath before he went overboard, and the dark water made it hard to see. He panicked as he sank deeper and deeper. His lungs felt like they were on fire, and he couldn't find the release latch on the weight belt. The more he struggled, the faster he sank. Underwater, everything seemed to slow down. Elvis felt helpless, and the weight of the belt kept dragging him down. He tried to stay calm, but his mind was racing. He thought about his family, his friends, and all the things he still wanted to do. The water was cold, and he felt like he was running out of time. Just when it seemed like he was going to give up, a strong hand grabbed his arm. It was one of the crew members who had jumped in to save him. They quickly pulled him to the surface, and Elvis gasped for air. He coughed and sputtered, trying to catch his breath. The crew helped him back onto the boat, and everyone was relieved to see him safe. Elvis sat on the deck, still in shock. He realized how close he had come to losing his life. It was a scary moment that made him think about what was really important. He knew he had to be more careful and not take things for granted. From that day on, he was more aware of the risks and the need to stay focused, especially when he was working in dangerous conditions. The near-drowning experience stayed with Elvis. It reminded him that life is fragile and that every moment counts. He shared this story with us to emphasize the importance of looking out for each other and being prepared for anything. It was a lesson that stayed with us, and we always tried to be there for each other, just like that crew member had been there for Elvis. Elvis wasn't afraid of death. He saw it as a passage to a better place. He often told me and my brothers that when someone dies, they go to a place where there's no pain or suffering. He wanted us to understand that death was natural and not something to fear. One night, Vernon and I were watching TV in the kitchen at Graceland. I heard footsteps upstairs, which was strange because Elvis was away making a movie. I asked Vernon if he heard it, but he didn't. The footsteps kept coming, and this time Vernon heard them too. He turned off the TV and said, "It's time for bed." I was confused but didn't argue. When Elvis came home a month later, I told him about the strange noises. He smiled and took us upstairs to the attic. There we saw an old electric train, some of his army clothes, and his mama's clothes. He explained that the footsteps were his mama's. He said ghosts aren't scary. Sometimes they come back to watch over you and warn you of danger. We were relieved and never felt scared when we heard those sounds again. Elvis often talked about how short life could be. He said he felt like his time was limited, partly because his mama died young. He believed in living each day to the fullest, like it was his last. He taught us to take care of our bodies, but to remember they were just vessels for our spirits. One day, when I was 12, Elvis took me to the morgue. I was scared, but he explained that the body was just a shell, and the spirit had moved on to a better place. He wanted us to understand that life was a gift from God, and we should be grateful for every day. On August 14th, 1977, Elvis and I had a deep conversation. He asked if I believed God forgave me for my sins. I said yes, and we talked about God's grace and how it's the only way to heaven. He opened up about his own struggles, especially with women. He said he prayed for strength to change but never lost his faith. Elvis then talked about love. He said finding true love would change my life, and when it happened, it would feel like everything had fallen into place. He warned me not to mess it up like he did. He also told me never to give up on my dreams, especially my love for racing. The conversation ended with him saying, "I love you, Billy." I just patted him on the back, not realizing it was the last time I'd see him. He asked if I would help Rick and David pack for the tour on August 16th. I said yes and left. On August 16th, I was at work when my friends told me Elvis had died. I didn't believe them at first, but when I called Graceland, a crying woman confirmed it. I dropped the phone and fell to my knees, asking God why. I wished I had told Elvis I loved him that last time. I wished I had known it was the end. Elvis's lesson stayed with me. He taught me to live every day with purpose, to never give up on my dreams, and to always express love to the people I care about. I learned to number my days and live with a heart of wisdom. I pulled myself together and got into the car. I wasn't in any shape to drive, but somehow I made it to Graceland. There was a huge crowd when I arrived. The police cleared the way, so I could drive up to the gates. As I drove through, I remembered the first time I did this in 1960. I drove to the backyard and saw Rick and David standing there. I got out of the car and walked over to them. We didn't say a word. We just hugged and started to cry. Lisa Marie drove up in her golf cart and stopped beside me. "Uncle Billy, do you want to take a ride with me?" she asked. "Not right now, sweetie, but I will later," I said. As she drove off, I asked Rick and David if she knew what had happened. They said yes. I wish I had taken that ride with her. We weren't the only ones in pain. Everyone in the family was hurting. Elvis had been like a big brother and a father to us, but Vernon was having an especially hard time. He had nothing left to live for. On August 16th, I thought there would be 2 deaths, Elvis and Vernon. I went to the kitchen to check on Vernon. He was sitting in a chair, and I'd never heard such a heartbreaking sound. It was like he was a broken man. I knelt down in front of him. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "He's gone, Billy. Sonny's gone." "I know, Daddy. He's in heaven now," I replied. Vernon tried to stand, and I helped him. He hugged me, and I could feel his body shaking. "He's gone, Billy. My son is gone," he kept saying. I started praying, asking God to be with him and not let him die that day. One of the maids came over and suggested he sit down. I agreed and told Vernon, "I'm not going anywhere, Daddy. I'll stay with you." He finally let go and sat back down. I knelt beside him, putting my arm on his shoulder. "I'm not going anywhere, Daddy. I'll stay as long as you want me to." I stayed with him for about 30 minutes. People came in to talk to him, but I didn't say anything. They told me, "I'm glad you're with him, Billy." When the phone rang, a maid said, "Dr. Nick will be here soon." I stood up. "Daddy, I'm going outside for a while. If you need me, send someone to get me, okay?" "I will, Billy, thank you." I walked outside, not knowing it would be the last time I was with Vernon. It was the last real talk we would ever have. The sights and sounds of that day still haunt me sometimes. I've thought about the days after the funeral over and over. How can someone go from having a family to having nothing that fast? But I've learned to accept that's the way Vernon was. No matter how he saw it, I still loved him. I always will. In the years since Elvis passed, people have wondered what more he could have achieved. I think he might have wanted to get into dramatic roles or even direct films. He was interested in doing a European tour. But maybe there's a sense in which the speculation doesn't matter. Elvis had a mission and he completed it. He gave his heart and soul to his fans for more than 2 decades. Maybe he just needed to rest. Elvis never stopped trying to be better. He loved his fans so much that he didn't know how to take a break. When he died, he had nothing left to give. If you open Elvis's Bible, you'll see a note he wrote under Psalm 46, quoting verse 10. "Be still and know that I am God." Elvis had talent, fame, and fortune, but he struggled with stillness. Now that his journey was over, I hoped he found the rest he always seemed to need. Elvis often talked about the afterlife. He said, "If I die before you, I'll do everything I can to show it's real. I'll send a message somehow." I always dismissed it because it was so morbid. At his funeral, as his casket was being placed in the hearse, a huge tree limb broke off and hit the ground with a loud thud. The tree was healthy, and it wasn't windy. There was no reason for the limb to fall. As we rode in the funeral procession, I thought of what Elvis had said. I took it as a sign that there was an afterlife, and he was happy. I wish I could have said the same for me. His death hit me hard, and I felt like I was falling to the bottom of life. It would be 10 years before I heard from Elvis again. My brothers and I dealt with Elvis's death very differently. Ricky turned his life around. He went to seminary and became a pastor. A year or 2 later, David became an evangelist. I was the rebellious one who went the opposite direction. I started using drugs and alcohol. I was like the prodigal son who hadn't come home yet. The only bright spot during this time was Liz. We met shortly after Elvis died, and I fell for her right away. It happened just like Elvis said. He told me, "Whenever you go looking for love, you'll never find it. It will hit you when you least expect it." Liz was the first woman who cared about me for who I was, not for my connection to Elvis. We dated for a couple of years, but I didn't want to take her down my destructive path, so we broke up. Around 1980, 3 years after Elvis passed, I was still in Memphis. My brother Rick came to visit. We were on my mom's balcony. and he could see I was in trouble. He talked about God's love, and how Jesus died for our sins. I felt convicted because I had been baptized when I was 14, but I hadn't understood it. "Do you think you're ready?" he asked. "Rick, I really need help. I don't know what I'm doing." "That's why you've got to turn your life over to God." "Rick, I've tried." "You tried as in, did you do it? Did you actually turn your life over to God?" "No." We talked more about God's love and Jesus' sacrifice. I felt convicted and said, "Rick, I want to get baptized. Why don't we do it now?" We walked to the swimming pool. On the way, he started joking with me. "I'm going to dunk you twice just to make sure God takes away the stuff you've done." He was making me laugh, which was classic Rick. Rick baptized me, and for a while, I felt clean and renewed. But as soon as he left Memphis, I went back to my old ways. I knew God was still with me, even though I was using drugs again. Rick and David were big influences on me. When I visited their churches, I would cry because I was convicted. Elvis had said destiny brought us together. Rick said, "Whenever you decide to share your testimony, Billy, it's going to be powerful." I didn't understand what he meant. He said, "God has given us a key. What are we going to do with it? Are we going to try and save lives like Elvis would want us to? Or are we going to act like idiots like you've been doing?" I felt convicted, but it wasn't enough to change me. I needed something more. In 1987, 10 years after Elvis passed, I was living in Nashville. I had been wandering for a decade. I got married in 1984, and my daughter, Brooke, was born the same year. I heard that people on the other side sometimes try to communicate through dreams. One night, I had a dream I was talking to Elvis. I asked, "What does it feel like to be dead?" He gave me a blank stare. "Don't you know?" I woke up immediately, knowing my lifestyle had to stop. I couldn't go on like this. I knew I would die if I kept living this way. The next day, I asked my mom for help. She took me to a drug treatment center. They recommended an outpatient program, but I knew I would use again if I did that. I ended up staying for 45 days in inpatient care. It was that bad. During the program, I realized what I had been doing to myself. I was running from my problems. The staff warned me that just because I stopped using drugs, my problems wouldn't disappear. But now I knew how to deal with them. My first real test came before I even left rehab. My wife had sent divorce papers and moved with our daughter to San Diego, where I had spent time after Elvis died. When I got out of rehab, I moved to Florida. Rick bought me a bus ticket and put me up in a trailer. I started going to AA meetings in church. My trailer was next to a church Rick attended. My involvement in AA helped me see where I needed to make amends and get my life back on track. I was determined to be a part of my daughter Brooke's life. I moved to San Diego to be near Brooke. I knew I and her mom weren't meant for each other, so I focused on taking care of Brooke. We moved to Nashville, but the writing of my book, Elvis, My Brother, put a strain on our marriage. When the book was released in 1989, we went our separate ways, but I was awarded custody of Brooke. After our separation, I had a few relationships, but none lasted. I got married again, but it didn't last. After Brooke moved to be with her mom, I was happy with my life. I had a job selling motorcycles, and was living with my mom because of her health problems. One day, my mom called me at work, and asked me to take her to the ER. For the next several months, I watched her slowly get worse. 2 days before she passed, she got her wish to see all 3 of her sons together. Rick, David, and I were with her when she took her last breath. Shortly after I lost my mom, I got a call from Liz. I hadn't heard her voice since 1979, but I knew it was her. I had never stopped thinking about her. We talked for hours, and I took it as a sign from God. I asked Liz if I could see her. I needed to know if the feelings I had for her were still there. I drove from Nashville to Memphis, even through a tornado. When we saw each other, it was like we'd never been apart. Life with Liz was fantastic. We moved back to Memphis and attended church together. We built our relationship around God, and He became our foundation. My life seemed settled in a way it had never been, but everything changed on May 19th, 2018. It was just an ordinary Saturday like any other. Liz and I were at her daughter Ashley's house, and her other daughter, Emily, was there too. I was feeling a bit tired and not my usual self. I had some errands to run and came back around noon. My brother David was with me, and I suggested we watch a movie. He was a bit hesitant, but finally agreed. We went upstairs, and I turned on the TV. I lay back on the couch, feeling a bit sleepy. That's when things took a turn. I found myself standing above what looked like clouds. It was incredibly bright, but I couldn't see where the light was coming from. The light surrounded everything, making it all glow. To my right, I saw a city that seemed to be made of gold. It was different from any city I had ever seen, with buildings and steeples that glowed. I felt a strong sense that this was where I was supposed to go. The clouds felt solid under my feet as I took a step. As soon as I did, I felt an overwhelming sense of love. It was like the first time you fall in love, but 1,000,000 times stronger. I felt at peace, not in a hurry, and there was no sense of time. All the worries of everyday life were gone. I just felt a deep sense of love, joy, and peace. As I walked toward the city, I saw a crowd of people. They were all dressed in white, and their silhouettes were distinct, especially the colors of their heads. I was dressed in a bright white robe, too. I saw a figure in the distance, and the feeling of love grew even stronger. As I got closer, the figure turned around. It was Elvis. "Billy," Elvis said, smiling and looking right at me. "Elvis," I replied, taking a step toward him. He gave me a hug, and I felt his love. We didn't need to speak. I could sense his thoughts. "It's good to see you," Elvis said. Then the edges of my vision started to get darker, and I felt scared. The darkness moved toward his face. "Tell all of my family, friends, and fans I love them, and I'll see them when they get here." "I love you, Billy," Elvis said. I finally got to say the words I wished I had said years ago. "I love you too." Then a powerful yet calming voice spoke to me. It was God, he said. "No doubt, no fear, Billy." I understood exactly what he meant. Don't doubt there is a heaven, and have no fear. This is where you're going if you believe with all your heart and soul that Jesus came and died for you. The darkness surrounded me, and I heard Liz screaming, "Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." I opened my eyes and saw Liz above me. I was lying on the floor. I asked, "What's going on? Why am I here?" Then I saw the paramedics coming up the stairs. They put me on a gurney and told me, "Don't worry, son. We'll take care of you. You'll be at the hospital soon." At the hospital, Liz and David told me what had happened. David said, "You died, Billy." I was shocked. Liz added, "Yes, baby, you died." They said I was gone for about 10 or 12 minutes. I didn't remember any of it. They explained that I had a heart attack, a stroke, and a seizure. Ashley did CPR, and the paramedics helped bring me back. After a few days, I was up and walking. The medical staff was amazed. They couldn't believe I was moving around so well. I was cleared to go home a few days later. About a month later, I told Liz and David about my experience. They were shocked but supportive. They agreed that it was real and encouraged me to share it. I was a bit hesitant, but something inside told me to. A few months later, I heard God's voice again, telling me to share my experience with everyone. I agreed. This experience brought me closer to God and gave me a clear purpose. I wasn't afraid to tell anyone about heaven and the love of Jesus. It gave me a lot of comfort, and I knew I had a mission. When I think about heaven, I feel an overwhelming sense of love, joy, and happiness. It's all because of Jesus. After my experience, I started reading the Bible with new eyes. The last book, Revelation, describes heaven beautifully. It talks about a new heaven and a new earth, a place where God will live with his people, and there will be no more tears, death, or pain. It's real, and it's all because of Jesus. When I pray now, I just want to say, thank you, thank you, thank you. God has already given me everything. I pray for others too, but my biggest prayer is that God opens their eyes to the truth. Elvis was a man who radiated love. He didn't care about your job, skin color, or wealth. He saw into your heart and soul. He lived by the words in 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter of the Bible. He helped people without expecting anything in return. He wanted to be like Christ, and he tried his best to make people's days better. Elvis taught me not to take life for granted. Every day was an adventure with him. He lived life to the fullest, and he inspired me to do the same. He also taught me to base my life on the Bible. He wasn't perfect, but he always tried his best to live by God's word. He wanted to make a difference, and he did. Elvis brought a little bit of heaven to earth. Anyone who met him felt loved and safe. His love was real, and it changed people's lives. I hope this story brings you closer to God and helps you see the world through a new lens of love and faith. Elvis always believed in living life to the fullest, using all the gifts and talents God gave him. He never held back, and he encouraged others to do the same. But Elvis didn't just talk about these things, he lived them. He didn't preach or shove his beliefs down anyone's throat. Instead, he showed people what it meant to live a life full of love and faith. One of the most important things to Elvis was showing God's love to everyone around him. He didn't care if people believed the same things he did. He thought it was amazing that everyone was different, and he often said, "God made Ford and Chevrolet to explain how diversity makes the world interesting." Elvis saw the value in every person, no matter who they were or where they came from. Elvis had a special way of making people feel special. Whether it was a fan, a friend, or someone he just met, he always made them feel like they were the most important person in the room. He believed that everyone deserved to be treated with kindness and respect. When he dealt with his own doubts or negative thoughts, he would turn to prayer and the Bible for guidance. He found strength in his faith, and he wanted others to find that same strength. Elvis's music was more than just entertainment. It was a way for him to share his faith and spread God's love. He hoped that when people listened to his gospel songs, they would understand the message of hope and love he was trying to convey. He believed that God was calling everyone, and he wanted people to answer that call. One day, I remember Elvis and I were sitting in the living room, just talking. I told him how much I admired the way he treated everyone with kindness and respect. He was so touched by my words that he hugged me and said, "That's one of the nicest things anyone has ever said to me." It was a special moment, and it showed me how much it meant to him to be a positive influence on others. Elvis's faith was a big part of who he was. He underlined verses in his Bible and wrote notes to himself, reminding him of important truths. One of his favorite verses was from Psalm 11, where he wrote, "In the Lord I place my trust, and he will guide me." This was his way of saying that no matter what happened, he trusted God to lead him. Elvis's legacy isn't just about his music or his movies. It's about the love and faith he shared with everyone he met. He wanted people to know that God loves them, no matter what. He believed that everyone could find hope and joy through their faith, just like he did. Elvis's message is still relevant today. He would want us to remember that God is always there, ready to help us and guide us. He would want us to treat everyone with love and respect, just like he did. And he would want us to never stop trying to be the best version of ourselves, using all the gifts and talents we have been given. Billy looked back on his life with Elvis and saw a tapestry of moments, both joyful and painful, that wove together to form a rich and meaningful story. He remembered the times they spent driving fast cars, the late-night conversations about faith, and the simple acts of kindness that Elvis showed to everyone around him. Despite the fame and fortune, Elvis never lost sight of what truly mattered: his relationships, his faith, and his love for music. For Billy, Elvis was more than just a stepfather. He was a mentor, a friend, and a brother. Elvis taught him the importance of staying grounded, no matter how much the world tried to lift him up. He showed Billy that everyone deserves respect, regardless of where they come from or who they are. Elvis's life was a testament to the idea that even in the midst of chaos, you can choose to be a light to those around you. As Billy thought about his own life, he realized that the lessons he learned from Elvis were still guiding him. He understood that every day is a gift, and that we should use our time to make a positive difference in the world. Whether it's through a kind word, a helping hand, or simply being there for someone in need, we all have the power to make a difference. Billy also knew that life is full of challenges, and that it's okay to ask for help when you need it. Just like Elvis, who turned to his faith during difficult times, Billy found strength in his own relationship with God. He believed that no matter what life throws at you, there is always hope, and that with God's help, you can overcome anything. As he closed the door on this chapter of his life, Billy felt a sense of gratitude for the time he spent with Elvis. He knew that the memories would stay with him forever, and that the lessons he learned would continue to shape who he was and who he wanted to be. He hoped that by sharing his story, others might find inspiration and encouragement to live their lives with purpose, kindness, and faith. In the end, Billy realized that the most important things in life aren't the fame, the fortune, or the material possessions. They are the relationships we build, the love we share, and the legacy we leave behind. And for Billy, that legacy was one of a man who, despite his flaws, lived a life that made the world a little brighter for everyone who knew him.